So yesterday I talked about the skip campaign feature and how it's huge for the game. It absolutely gives you a ton of freedom, but a lot of people don't seem to understand how this actually works. I've seen a lot of people say, yeah, you cannot access world tier 3 and 4, and I will have to say that this is actually not true. You can, and I want to explain how, but there's a huge confusion about how much freedom this gives, as well as some people providing some criticism on this. So I want to clear the air as well as provide a little bit more information on how this truly works, because some people really don't seem to get it. So what does the campaign skip actually do? Because some people seem to kind of miss a couple things in my previous video. So I just want to briefly reiterate as well as expand on it just a bit. So this feature unlocks once you beat the storyline on a single character. It can be any type of character. However, if you pick a hardcore seasonal character, it will only apply to those other hardcore seasonal characters. If you then pick, I don't know, just a regular seasonal character, you're going to have to presumably do it on a new classification of character. However, once you've beaten it, which is 6 acts, roughly 35 hours for those of you that are curious, you will be able to skip the campaign on any future character. At that time, you should be roughly around level 50. Again, this is just things that developers have said in a few different interviews over the course of a year at this point. Now, what does this actually do for us? Because a couple people think that, well, you can't access World Tier 3, maybe it's a bad thing, which we're going to go over those comments in a little bit. First thing it absolutely does, and this is not a dispute, is gives you freedom, right? So if you choose to create an alternate character, or potentially in future seasons, if you do not want to do the campaign, you don't have to. You can run dungeons instead. You can repeat the same dungeon if you want. You can do sellers. You can do open world events. You can move around the map. Whatever you want to do, you have freedom to do so, which is massive for a lot of people, right? That freedom aspect is super important for a lot of people, and I, for one, think that this is always a good thing, just because, again, when you're playing a game, the best way to do it is to give people what they want to do, or at least the option to do so, right? So in my opinion, that's like all good things. I don't really see a counter argument for that, although I do see some criticisms of this feature, which we'll get into later. Second thing it allows you to do is potentially level up quicker by accessing world tier 3 and 4. This is something that people don't seem to understand. So I want to address a couple comments here. But before we talk about this, I want to describe how you actually unlock world tier 3 and 4, because I've actually done this. You have to beat the capstone dungeon, okay? So we've gone over this quite a few times, and we even had it reiterated in the previous dev update live stream with Riker, where Riker talked about how he was level 45, tried to beat the dungeon, and it was too difficult, okay? So when you hit level 50, roughly, you don't have to be level 50. This is the key. You don't have to be level 50. You can do it as early as, you know, as far as I've seen, like level 15, maybe even sooner than that. If you have the stats, you just have to beat the dungeon to access World Tier 3 and have beaten the campaign. But since we can skip the campaign's not necessary at all. Now, the thing with this capstone dungeon is usually you're going to be around level 50 always at the end of your campaign run. That's typically what ends up happening. So most people just challenge it at level 50, but with this skip campaign feature, you can actually challenge it earlier. Now, how do you challenge it earlier? Because we've already established this is scaled to like a level 50 piece of content. It's going to be quite difficult. Well, guess what? You can share gear across characters. You can also go ahead and potentially, well, get extra skill points, modify your builds, right? We know that we can move legendary aspects around. We can get higher level items on our lower level characters. This is how you beat the capstone dungeon at potentially level 1. I'm not quite sure how high the items scale, but if you've maxed out a character, let's say you're someone who really likes alternate characters and you want to play all the classes and you want to dive into the season, you're a super hardcore player. For example, myself. Well, I'm going to rush on one character, get that character to level 100, really min-max that character probably, or just do some endgame content. After that, what I'll be doing is moving that gear over to other alternate characters, similar to how you can do in Diablo 3, and just blasting through the early game. We've already done this. I've already had a couple videos in the beta showcasing how you can do this. At level 25, or rather a level 35 boss in the left hand side of the map allows you to drop higher level items, but then you implant or imprint aspects onto them to drop their level, which is able to be used on low level characters. What this means is that you can instantly access World Tier 3 and World Tier 4. Now I want to talk about some of these comments here to give you guys specifically why I'm kind of making this video. First one here is by a Rantier Darkhand. You cannot access World Tier 3/4, beat the campaign with the first character, then you don't need to do it anymore. Absolutely true, but you still have to level up doing anything you want and do the dungeon at the cathedral to access World Tier 3 and kill the boss at 70 to World Tier 4. This is absolutely true. The World Tier 4 is a level 70 dungeon, or rather scaled to level 70. World Tier 3 is a level 50 dungeon, scaled to level 50. However, there's a critical thing. You do not have to level to 50 to access the dungeon. You just need to be able to beat it. Continues on to say, you like to do quests, it's a good way to reach 50, skip the rest, go to the dungeon to World Tier 3. He talks about some of the freezing, etc., which isn't necessarily part of this video, so I want to focus on that first part. This is true. Everything he said is true, but that is the implication that you have to get to level 50 to do the dungeon, which you do not. You just have to be able to beat it, which for some people may have to be level 30, level 40, level 50, but I guarantee you for hardcore players or for players who are more invested in the game, not even necessarily hardcore players, but maybe the top 10, top 20% of the game is absolutely going to be able to access World Tier 3 when they start a new character. Who knows, with the items that we get at level 100, you may be able to even do it if you're a more casual player. But as a more casual player, you may not even reach those level 100s. So again, making alternate characters and doing this is something that, well, you know, most casual players don't necessarily even do to get past level 50, right? Now, for future seasons, which I didn't mention in that video, you will not be able to do this, most likely, right? Because you won't have the stats. But as for alternate characters, you will. Another comment here by Wilson. I was under the impression that World Tiers 3/4 are locked behind beating special capstone dungeons meant for level 50 and 70, not the campaign. This is true. You have to beat the capstone dungeons, but again, at level 50, it requires you to have beaten the campaign and the capstone dungeon to unlock World Tier 3. It requires both. So the problem with the capstone dungeon was that even if you were level 30 and you're like, yeah, I'm super good at the game, I can go and beat this capstone dungeon, which is possible, right? You still can't access World Tier 3 because you have to beat the campaign, right? So with transferring gear between characters, extra skill points, or maybe just really good skill, you can beat it earlier on another character, which allows you to level quicker in these higher world tiers. So I want to address one of the biggest criticisms that I've seen, and I think that this person, Arc4 here, kind of summed up one of the biggest criticisms that I've seen. Hot take here, but this isn't a good thing for the game long term because it's almost entirely feeding into instant gratification. To some degree, I agree with that, which is why it's such a popular thing amongst players. If it's a time saver, it's skipping progress, and if it's an alternative for leveling, it's still immediate access to the pseudo endgame loop. Sure, you get to do the stuff you want to do sooner or right away, but the whole problem with instant gratification is that it's cheating your psychological reward for short-term game at a long-term cost. In other words, this won't make you want to play more over the long haul, but actually less, as it satiates you more rapidly with less effect. So this is the only criticism that I've seen, and I'll have to say, this might be a little blunt, but this is sort of just projecting your own view on this. That's what it is, right? Some people don't care about the early leveling process. It's not fun to them. They don't care about maybe missing out on the early game progression. What it does actually is make people enjoy the game more because they don't get to slug through the early game and they just get to experience their builds immediately. Again, this is very, very common amongst the mobile games. Mobile games have tons of people, well, I shouldn't say tons, but a good amount of people that spend money in the game. Why? To skip progression so that they can play with their characters at an end game level, because that is what's fun to them. So while I will say it's totally fair if you or someone doesn't enjoy this feature, but in terms of what this feature does, all it does is allow people to play how they want. If you don't want to skip the progress, cool. If you do want to go ahead and skip the campaign because you want to do dungeons, great. The only criticism that I think is, I guess you could say reasonable, is if someone doesn't want to have to, I guess, follow the most meta strategy. They prefer to have that campaign, but I guess in that case, you still have a meta strategy, even if this wasn't existing or this feature didn't exist, which is that you'd have to do campaign and then you'd have to come back and do these things. So there's always a meta strategy. So I don't even think that's a reasonable criticism for this feature. But I do think that it's totally fair if you don't like it. If you do like it, doesn't really matter to me. All I'm saying is that this is perhaps one of the best features that we have in terms of giving players the freedom that they want or would like to have, right? And at the end of the day, as I said, this is huge for potential alternate characters. Definitely more hardcore players are going to benefit from this way more because they're going to be able to grind way more, right? Casual players aren't going to benefit from this as much, although it will scale between seasons, right? So if you just want to have fun, which in fact actually does help casual players because maybe they don't want to replay the campaign every single season and now they just want to run in, do some dungeons, progress that way, great, you can do that now. So to me, this is just an amazing feature, but I wanted to just correct some confusion out there because a lot of people don't seem to understand how the progression sense works in this game. And I've seen this very, very commonly across a couple of my videos. So that's going to be it, guys. Let me know what you think about the skip campaign feature because I know a lot of you mentioned that this is a really, really great feature, and I could go on and on and on and on about how I feel as well as a lot of you feel. But one thing that's important to me, more so than just how we feel about things in terms of the Diablo 4, which, by the way, that's kind of half of why I make videos, is actually helping you understand what we're getting in the game. Because at the end of the day, I'm here to talk about Diablo 4, help you guys through the process, and hope you have the best time possible, because I know I'm going to try to have the best time possible. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.